Hi, I'm Sarah Smith from Nourished and Nurtured Life, and I want to talk to you some more about homeschooling today. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay, so we're going to talk today about curriculum versus the environment in homeschooling. Curriculum is actually less important than you think. A lot of people, when they first start out homeschooling or even have been homeschooling for a few years, they tend to think that curriculum is really important. They might spend a lot of time researching different curriculums. I know I sure did. And they'll think that if I just find the right curriculum, then everything is going to kind of fall in place and homeschooling is going to work well. But in the long run, curriculum isn't actually able to do that. The real thing that you want to focus on is the environment of your homeschool. And the environment is more important than the curriculum. And I'll talk about why. So when I first started homeschooling, I made a lot of mistakes the first couple of years. I'm kind of a type A person. I used to be a NASA aerospace engineer, so I'm pretty structured. I had done a lot of research and decided I was going to do this rigorous classical kind of homeschooling. I thought we were going to get ahead. I imposed a lot of structure, a lot of stress on the homeschool, and it really didn't work. By about 2 years into it, we really crashed and burned. And what ended up happening is that the relationship between me and my daughter was really damaged at that point. She didn't like me very much anymore. And she also had decided that she didn't like math or writing. And she was only 6 years old. So I realized something is really wrong here. This can't be the way this is supposed to be. And I ended up having to go through a process of deschooling. I did another video about that to tell you how to deschool if you're struggling with your homeschool too. That was a really important part for us in being able to get back on track and to then create a better homeschooling environment for my kids. Now, if my son had been the first child, I probably would have quit homeschooling in that first year or two because he has a very different personality than my daughter. He is a lot more stubborn. He's right there eating his lunch in the background. So he knows I'm saying there's no secrets here. And it wouldn't have worked. The way I was trying to impose so much structure and so much rigor, it really would have failed with him. I probably would have just given up and thought that homeschooling wasn't for me. But that didn't happen. And instead, what happened is I just started doing research because that's what I do. I went and tried to find other ways to do homeschooling because I thought this can't be right. There has to be a different way to do this. And so now for the last over 8 years, I've been focusing our homeschool instead on creating joy in learning, on finding ways to make this really sustainable and enjoyable for all of us. And it has worked really well. So we've been homeschooling for more than 10 years at this point. My kids right now are 12 and 15, and they love our homeschooling. They even choose to continue homeschooling over the summer months. So it's a very different dynamic than those first couple years when there was so much stress and so much force and pushing, and it's a completely different environment, and it has worked out so much better for us. And in large part, it was inspired by reading the book Thomas Jefferson Education, which I mentioned in one of my other videos. And I want to talk to you about some of the principles from that book and how they work for creating a really good environment for homeschooling. So if you focus on the environment of your homeschool, in the long run, it's going to be a lot more sustainable. It's going to be more successful. And these are some things to think about when you're focusing on the environment. And I'm going to talk about each one of these in more detail. But relationships, love of learning, and supporting your kids, their uniqueness, their inner genius. So the relationships in homeschooling become really important. If your kids and you end up getting into an antagonistic situation like I did with my daughter those first couple years, where I was really trying to, push her to do certain things at certain times, that really can damage the relationship. And then in the long run, that can make your homeschool not work out very well. So if you prioritize the relationship over the schooling, you'll have a lot better success in the long run. So you're looking at things like being compassionate for your kids, building trust so that they trust you and they know that you have their best interests at heart. And you want your kids to feel like you're supporting them. You are a supportive person to them. You're not somebody who is criticizing them all the time or making them feel like they're behind. You don't want any of that kind of dynamic in your homeschool. Another thing that's really important with your homeschool environment is to prioritize, if you have more than one child, for those kids to get along really well together. Prioritize their relationship and figure out how to make their relationship work really well together. Because if you have kids that can't get along and you guys are going to be home all the time together, it's not going to work. You're probably going to feel like you're ready to tear your hair out. Instead, try to focus on finding ways for them to get along with each other, common interests for them. And one of the beauties of homeschool is that you can actually support your kids and become really good friends with each other. My kids, even though they're different genders and 3 years apart, they're best friends. And that has been done intentionally and on purpose, because I knew that a lot of times in public school, the siblings really get pushed apart from each other. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to be different with our homeschool. So prioritize relationships over the schooling. If it comes to a point where you're, sometimes you're going to be up against a wall and you have to choose between those two things, choose the relationship. Because in the long run, the school will happen, the education will happen if the relationship is really strong. Okay, so the second principle for building a good environment in your homeschool is to focus on giving your kids a love of learning. Now, this is something that is very different from the way that most of us were taught in school, the way that I was taught in school, where we were told, you're supposed to do this at this age, you're supposed to pass this test. Everything was very structured by how old you were, what grade you were in. And instead of that, try to focus on giving your kids the ability to fall in love with learning so they actually want to learn, so they enjoy learning. One of the things that's important for this is the principle of inspire, not require, which is again from the Thomas Jefferson education book. And the idea is, instead of requiring your kids to do specific things, focus on creating inspiration for them so that they will be interested in things and want to learn about them. So some ways that you can do that: number one, think outside the box on the curriculum. Textbooks tend to be really boring. Worksheets tend to be really repetitive and boring. Those things really suck the fun out of learning, and they can make it where kids don't think they like learning or they don't think they like school. You don't have to do those things at homeschool. You can make it completely different than that. If you read aloud the stories of great people in history and put them into context so they know how that person ended up the way they were, not just their achievements or when they were in office, but their story of them is very powerful, and it really helps inspire kids and adults too. So reading aloud great stories, the lives of great people, is a really important tool for inspiring your kids to love learning. For math, there's all kinds of different things you can do besides worksheets. Board games and card games are really good, especially for younger kids. For elementary school math, you don't have to even use a curriculum. You can get all the math that you need through using games and other things like that. There's ways to inspire your kids to want to write. If they have pen pals or sending letters to grandma, writing stories, those kind of things are much more engaging than just, rote practicing writing the same thing over and over and over like you did in school. Nature study is another thing that can be really important for giving kids a love of learning. When kids get outside and they get away from the distractions, and when we as adults get outside and get away from those distractions, get away from the screens, get away from our phones, the news, we can really open up our minds and be receptive and take in information in a very different way. So I think nature study is a really important part of homeschooling, and it's a really good thing to make sure is happening regularly, that you are getting out in nature, that your kids are getting out in nature. Life skills are another good way to inspire a love of learning. Now, this particular picture right here of my son, he's using a power sander here. Maybe that doesn't sound like fun to you, but my son loves tools. He loves learning how to work things, how to make things work. And so for him, learning how to sand our picnic table is great. He loves doing it, right? So look for things in your home environment that really go with your kids and their learning styles, and roll with it. You don't have to make your school at home look like school at public school. One other really good principle for giving your kids a love of learning is for you as the parent to actually lead out, demonstrate what it looks like to be educating yourself. Now, this is totally different. This is not something that I've ever heard of with regards to public school or how kids get educated. But this is another principle I learned from Thomas Jefferson Education that has been really important for me as a type A kind of mom. What this means for me is that if I start feeling like I want to push, if I start feeling like I want to apply some pressure about education or schooling, I'm supposed to apply that to me, to myself. I should go read a book about whatever it is we're learning about. I should go do my own math projects. I can learn my own piano. So by doing that, by focusing on my education, it gives me a lot more to give back to my kids when we're talking about things, but it also inspires them because they see what it looks like to be a lifelong learner. And so they will naturally emulate that. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to touch on for building a really good environment for homeschooling is supporting your child's inner genius. Your kid is unique. Each of your children is unique. They have specific gifts they came with. They have specific talents, specific interests, and homeschooling can really capitalize on those and use those to help the kids get prepared for life. So instead of focusing on grade levels and everybody learning the same thing at a specific year, you could focus instead on each of your kids and their own developmental path. Now, you could take 10 different kids who are 8 years old, and you're going to find a really wide range of skill levels in different things. Some kids are going to write much easier. Some kids are going to read easier. Some kids are going to be better at math. It doesn't matter. It's fine. That's how we're made. Everybody is different. So the idea that everybody needs to learn the exact same thing at the exact same age is really false. And it can really short circuit the learning process if your kids start to feel like they're behind, if you start feeling like, oh, we haven't gotten this yet, and we're almost to the end of second grade, and we were supposed to. That kind of stress is really not good for your homeschool, and it's not good for your kids to want to learn. So just try to let go of that stuff. Instead, you can focus on figuring out what your kids are good at, finding their own talents, finding their interests. Now, once your kid is interested in something, this can be a really powerful tool for your homeschool. Let me give a couple examples here. So my daughter, when she was 6 years old, decided that she wanted to have a chicken egg business. And she was 6, right? So it's like, okay, how are we going to make this work? We figured out a plan, which was, okay, she's going to have to save money because you can't start a business without saving up money to invest in the business in the first place. And the other thing was she had to demonstrate that she can do this. She could be responsible to take care of chickens. So at that point, we already had a couple chickens. And so she became the sole person responsible for taking care of the chickens for a year. And she did that for a year while she was saving up money. And then she was ready to start her business. And so at that point, she bought a bunch of chicks, and she's been off and rolling since then with her chicken egg business. A few years later, my son got really interested and decided he wants to buy into her business. So they came up with an agreement. He saved up money and bought in. They're now full partners. They own this business together. Now, this business, which doesn't look anything like school, this business has been absolutely tremendous for my kids for their education. They've learned how to be really steady with taking care of animals. They've learned about how to take care of animals. They have learned about profits and loss. They've learned about negative numbers. That's loss in your business, right? There's all kinds of math that has come along with them learning how to have their business. They've had to learn how to balance the needs of their business. They set their price point and figure out kind of marketing strategies. So that's just one example of following a kid's interest and being able to use that as a really good tool in homeschool. A couple other examples. My son has been super into vehicles and cars since he was a toddler. And because of that, we've been able to use that as something that really motivates him to want to learn. We can go to the tire shop and he can watch all the different tools they're using and learn how those work. He can learn how to use all kinds of different power tools around the home. He can learn a lot of different things with how energy works and how mechanical machines work. And all of those things in the long run are going to prepare him for his own life mission, because your child's gifts are for a reason. They're here for a reason. There's something they're here to do. And part of the goal of educating them is to help them figure out what that is. And that's something that really gets left behind at school, at public school in general. My daughter's been super into horses for a long time. And that's another thing that in our homeschool has been super helpful. She went and learned all about different kinds of horse breeds, which also tied into geography, because there's breeds from different parts of the world that she could learn about. She learned about farriers and what they do. She has read so many different books about horses. So once you figure out what your kids are interested in, don't look at that as something that gets in the way of school. Instead, you can work with it and roll with it. And some days they get really into working on a project, and maybe that's what they need to do today. Maybe we're going to skip our morning school block and you get to work really hard on this project you're trying to figure out. Be flexible, be willing to go along with it, because those moments of passion are when your kids are going to learn a lot. So if you think about your own experience with learning, if somebody was telling you, you need to learn X, Y, and Z by Friday because we're going to have a test, that type of learning doesn't really stick with you. How many of those things do you still remember from school? Not very many. But when you were actually really interested in something and passionate about something, then when you learn things, it stuck with you. So you're actually helping your kids find their own talents, their own passions, and the learning that comes along with that is going to be lifelong for them. So once you've set up your good environment for homeschooling, there's something that you can aim for. And maybe this doesn't speak to you, but it really spoke to me, which was the idea that when your child is a teen, they could have a self-directed education. They could be in charge of educating themselves. Now, here's a quote from Isaac Asimov. Self-education is, I firmly believe, the only kind of education there is. This is what we were just talking about with passion and things that you're interested in. That type of education is going to stick with you. So my daughter now, she's 15, and she is having a self-directed education. She does participate in our morning school block, but then we also have a scholar contract. And for each semester, we talk about what she wants to learn, what she wants to work on. I give her some guidance there, but I'm her mentor, not her teacher. I'm helping her set goals, and then I'm helping her learn how to keep her goals. Does she stumble? Sure, of course. She's learning how to do this. We're learning how to do this together. But over time, she's learning how to decide what she's interested in, how to actually learn about it. Maybe she's going to go write a book. That's what she's working on a lot. Maybe there's specific books that she wants to read, or she wants to learn about the Constitution, whatever it is. We talk about that. We come up with a plan for the semester. We have an agreement of how much she's planning to do it. In agreement for that, I take on some of her chores, because we use a lot of chores in our homeschool as a really important part of kids learning work ethic and, you know, just learning how to take care of the home. But once she's in scholar phase for the semester, I will take over some of that so that she has a little bit more time to work on her studies. And she's at that point dedicating herself to learning. And as she gets older, this is going to become more and more time dedicated to her directing her own education. So that's, you know, if you have younger kids, maybe that seems really far out there. Or if your kids are already older, maybe it feels impossible, but it's not. It can happen. Okay, so let's circle back around to curriculum here. The thing about curriculum is that over time, the curriculum that you need is going to change. And it might even change from month to month in a semester. If you spend a lot of money on curriculum, you're going to feel obligated to use it even when it's not working. So I would recommend that you don't spend a lot of money on curriculum so that you have the flexibility to change gears if you need to in midstream and find something else that's working better. You can use any curriculum that you want to and still focus on having a really good learning environment. So it's not so much which curriculum you're using, but how you use it. Are you going to use a curriculum in a way where you are saying, okay, 5 days a week, you're going to do this many lessons, and that's the force approach? Or are you going to use a curriculum in a way of, let's see what we want to do with this. How much do we want to use it? Does this seem fun today? Maybe we can use this as a jumping off point and find some other books about it, or play some games along with it. Turning it into more of a joyful exploration makes it where any curriculum can be used well, and it can still support your kids in developing their love of learning. Okay, so those are some high points on how to create a good environment for homeschooling. If you want to dig deeper, here are a couple books that I would recommend. The first one, Leadership Education by Oliver and Rachel DeMille. That's the same author of Thomas Jefferson Education, but this is him with his wife writing this book. And this book is amazing. It has all kinds of super practical tips on ways you can set up your schooling environment, ways you can structure your days, and they call them ingredients. And you pick and choose which ingredients are going to work for you, which ones are going to help your homeschool be really successful. So I highly recommend that book. There's one other thing that that book does, which I haven't seen elsewhere, at least in this way. It talks a lot about the ages of kids and how they learn different at different ages, and how to set up your learning environment to support them at different ages. And that's really important because little kids learn differently than teenagers, and you don't want to apply the same techniques to those two age groups. But if you know more about how they learn at different ages, then you can really support them as they get older and move on into the teen years. This other book, Free to Learn, is written by a developmental psychologist, Peter Gray. And this isn't a homeschooling book per se, but it is a book about how the brain learns. So if you're a type A mom or dad or grandparent, and you maybe feel some hesitation about letting go of some of the structure, or about your homeschool not looking like school, this book is going to be really good for you, because it'll help you learn about the way the brain learns with play, and how much more effectively the brain learns through play. So that can help you let go of some of those things so that you can create an environment that's going to be really sustainable and really joyous for your kids. I hope this is helpful. Just know that homeschooling is a journey. You're going to learn a lot of things along the way. You're probably going to start out with homeschool looking a lot different than it will a few years later, and that's great. That means that you're adjusting to what you've learned about your kids and how they learn. So don't be afraid to change it up. Don't be afraid to do things differently, and don't be afraid to think outside the box. Take care. See you later.